Well, we are starting Fireside Chats. This is probably going to be the first episode, first time we're recording it. In this format, just give you a little bit of a background of the Fireside Chats. When I was in Arizona, me and Donna were both there. We were part of a vineyard church, and we'd just started learning about streams and some of the things that was available. We'd taken the art of hearing God and the understanding dreams and visions, and John Paul started this thing he called Fireside Chats, which was he would invite people together and just open up the floor for any type of question at all, anything spiritual or just natural that he may have had some information on. And there were some rather interesting conversations that happened. Don and I, when we moved up to New Hampshire, one of the reasons was because there was a Fireside Chat every month, and he'd made the mistake of saying that if somebody was a partner with Streams, they were welcome to join in on a Fireside Chat whenever he had it. And we figured if we moved there, then we could just do that every month. So we took advantage of that, and that wasn't the only reason, but that was one of the reasons why we moved up there. And I learned so much from those times. And I wanted to create a place where we could start to explore questions. And I'm sure there's going to be questions that are going to come up that I'm going to be completely stumped, and maybe we'll have to come back and do another video or something like that where I answer them after I've done some research. But we're starting out this set of Fireside Chats. We've got some people here. We just finished recording our Intro to Prophecy quarterly seminar. Some of you may have gotten to see that live when it came out. If you didn't, we're going to be putting out the recording of that over the next couple months. You will most likely be seeing it not too long after this comes out. But some of the people were here for that. We thought this is going to be a great opportunity. We've got some people that they're going to have some great questions. Why don't we see what comes up out of the conversations? So welcome to Fireside Chats, and let's jump into this. We've got the first hand. That was quick.
All right. I would just like to know a little bit more about you, John. Could you kind of describe for us your spiritual development? You mentioned you've had an alcohol, drug abuse background. What were some of either the works or the books or the moments for you in your life that you feel like you can look back on? You can say, this really formed this was a starting point, a launching pad for me. Could you describe for you those moments that were basically sacred moments in your life?
And I would say probably as much seasons as moments in a lot of ways. There's obviously that moment when it was the first day when I'd encountered the Lord. I didn't even know I'd encountered the Lord. I just woke up, things were different. And when I realized things were different, I went to put in a music CD, and I couldn't put it in because I knew that he wouldn't like it, and I had to figure out who he was. And all of a sudden, I realized I was aware of the presence of God. That was a moment, if you will. That was key. But a lot of the growth came through seasons of time. That period of time, we were going to a vineyard church, and our pastor had gone with John Wimber to a lot of the big conferences that he'd done in Australia, South Africa, England, around the world, gone to Anaheim. And being a vineyard pastor, he was invited to be on the ministry team. So he got to be right in the middle of all these crazy things that were happening. And he would always bring back the tape sets from the conference. And he would take those tape sets and take them to the library, and they would make copies of the tapes and make them available as a lending library. I was going to church, reading the Bible through, and I kept on coming up with these questions. And so I would Sunday morning, we'd get finished with a message, and I'd go up and I'd ask him my latest question. And I started asking him questions that he didn't know the answers to. And so he suggested at that point in time that I go to the lending library where we had all of these tapes that were available. And he said, go into the lending library, and anything that you see that has John Wimber's name on it, listen to it. And I have no idea how many there were, but most of those conferences were week-long conferences. So, there's one, I remember one of them had 22 tapes in the set. And I probably listened to a couple dozen of those sets and immersed in those, interspersed all of those words, put them all together, and you get that weird thing that I just said. In the midst of those was tapes from Kansas City during the Kansas City Prophet days with Bob Jones, where Mike Bickle's interviewing Bob Jones, Mike Bickle's interviewing Paul Cain, John Paul, and different ones. And I got to be exposed to that. And the very first Let the Fire Fall conference right after Toronto broke out, when John and Carol Arnott went up to Anaheim. They had the tapes from that conference. I got to listen to that. And one of the beautiful things that they did during that period of time is they kept the ministry time on the tapes. So you'd have the message, and then after the message, whatever ministry they did, they left the tape rolling for that ministry time. And I was, at the time, working as a pizza delivery driver. And I had 40 hours a week where I am in the car and I can listen. So I got discipled 40 hours a week for probably a year. I listened to message after message after message. Most of the time I was in the car, I was listening to messages. Even when I was home, I was listening to messages. So that season really marked me. And that's the foundation that I'm still building on, the understanding of the kingdom of God, of signs and wonders, the value for the move of the Spirit and the prophetic, and listening as Wimber and these other speakers would minister and trying to figure out how they were getting this stuff. How did they know that somebody's hands are burning right now? How do they know that this was going on or that was going on? And listening to them explain it, and I learned how to minister in the flow of the Holy Spirit through that season. That's probably the most impactful season of my life.
And it was because you fell off a ladder.
Well, yeah, and it was because I fell off a ladder. This is my wife, Donna. She's not on the camera, but you just heard her voice. The reason I was delivering pizza at that period of time, I'd been working construction most of my life. And I was trying to do a piece of construction, made a really stupid decision, fell. My feet were on the top of a 10-foot ladder. And when I fell, my brother caught my head so that it didn't hit the floor, but my wrist and my tailbone did. I shattered my wrist, broke my tailbone. It was in significant pain, emergency surgery. I mean, it was pretty rough, but I was not able to. It took me 6 or 7 years before I could move my wrist clear back to 90 degrees. It's not has quite as much movement as normal as my other wrist. I can go back further. This one I can't quite. It took me a long time to be able to do that. I couldn't do push-ups for about 8 years because the pain from the strain. So I'm not doing construction anymore. And I had no job skills whatsoever because I was a high school dropout. I got my high school diploma right around that time, shortly after that. All I could do was deliver pizza. So that put me in the car for 40 hours a week, which was God's way of preparing me for ministry. That was my seminary, it was my Bible school. And it was amazing. So that was one season. There's 2 other seasons that were significantly formational, if you will. The second season was when we moved up to New Hampshire. We'd been taking this couple of the Streams courses and really wanted to grow in the things of the prophetic and dream interpretation. Just knew that was something God was leading us to. So we moved up to New Hampshire to be a part of Streams community that was up there. Had no idea we were going to be on staff. Had no idea what that was going to look like. We just knew that there was a church up there. They were doing Fireside Chats, and they were going to do all the courses there. And we were traveling literally all over the country to take the Streams courses. We lived in Phoenix. We drove from Phoenix to Atlanta, Georgia to take the Art of Hearing God and Understanding Dreams and Visions course. We drove from Phoenix to Houston, Texas to take the Advanced Workshop in Dreams and Visions course. And they just released the Advanced Prophetic course, and they were getting ready to release another course. And we're thinking, this is all of our vacation time, just to take courses and go to these conferences. If we lived there, we could do this, and it would be a lot easier. And then we could be a part of a community that's going after it. That's why we moved to New Hampshire. And that period of time was probably the high point in many ways as far as the number of staff and the community that was developed. The area of New Hampshire that we were at was not a populated area. It wasn't an urban center. It was very rural, small town, small group of people. And on staff, we had between staff and interns around 70 people. And most of those had families. So there's a good 100 to 120 people in a town of 1,000 people that were Streams community. We started our own church just because there was no place that was open to the things of the Spirit within driving distance, especially when it became winter time. And in New Hampshire, when it's winter time, driving distance is 3 to 4 miles. It's not, it's not a long way because it's not safe to try to drive, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or an hour, which were the closest churches that were even open to the idea of the Spirit moving. So we had this community, and we spent all of our free time together. We'd be in weekends, we'd get together. We're part of an intercessory team. We'd pray together. We'd start work. We would do prophetic and seer exercises to get started for the day. We would have an hour's worth of prayer and worship to get going, and then we'd get to work. When it was lunchtime, for lunch, a few of us would bring our lunches into a little area we called the Dream Lab, and we'd sit down, we'd talk about dreams and interpret dreams, and study dream interpretation, and that was just normal, everyday life. It was normal. It became normal for us, even though as abnormal as it was. And that season, the level of supernatural activity that we were part of, the things that we saw, it was insane. And
chemical.
Yeah, Marilyn was part of that. She were living in Massachusetts or Rhode Island at the time, and she'd come up to a lot of the things that would happen in there in New Hampshire. 3-hour drive. It was astounding, the stuff we saw. I remember one day we were working, and one of the guys at the time was really pressing into the seer gift. And he described this afterwards, but he's sitting at his desk and he sees a red line of light going from in front of him, and it went out his office door. And he decided that it would be good to follow that light because God was going to show him something. And so he gets up, follows it, and he follows this string. It looked like a string in the air to him. He followed it all the way to one of the other staff members, and it went into her shoulder. So he thought, well, that's fun. So he touched her shoulder. She ends up on the floor, and over the next half an hour, there's 5 or 6 people laughing hysterically, cannot move, cannot get up, laid out on the floor, and the light disappears, so he goes back to his desk. They're there for almost another hour. But a little while later, he sees another one. I think the second one was yellow. He follows that one, goes to another area, does the same thing. And everybody falls over there. And we just would have stuff like that happen. And it was not unusual. It was not unusual. We'd have this girl that was from Scotland that had, I can't describe it any other way, but you hear phrases like this, but she had the voice of an angel. When she sang, it opened up stuff like I have never experienced in my life. And she'd just walk through the halls and just worship, and this wave of presence would follow her. And there'd be times where I'd just walk behind her just to be in that wave of presence and to hear the sounds. And there, just stuff broke out. And I learned so much about the seer realm and following the invitations, because God, when he opens something up, there's often, it's an invitation, not always a command. He does give commands, but if we only follow the commands, we're missing a bunch of what's available. And I learned to follow invitations in that season. The third season is when we had this breakout at the church that we pastored down in Massachusetts. We had a season of 2 years where you could count on the fingers of one hand the number of services where someone did not get healed. We had everything from tumors disappearing, medically documented MS, before MRI, lesions on the brain, after MRI, no lesions on the brain. We had a 10-year-old kid that got healed of asthma, running around, screaming and jumping. The first time in his life that he'd been able to run like that without completely going into an asthma attack. Again and again, we have stacks of testimonies of people that got healed. And we saw so much. And it was in that season that I realized how empty supernatural activity can be. Because in the midst of all of that happening, I also watched people that had levels of supernatural activity, but no character and no fruit. And I grew so disillusioned that that's where God really set in my heart the focus on looking for fruit. Because it was astounding the stuff we were seeing. And we'd see, we had a guy and I believe that he probably would have visions of being in heaven and having these encounters with God. And he was abusive to his wife and his daughter. And you could watch just by looking at them, you could see the level of oppression that they were under and the abuse that they were under. And you have this guy that's talking about his great experiences, and yet that level of dysfunction in the family. And that's just one picture. And there were many pictures that I saw in that period. And at the same time, I also saw some clear, because I have friends that at the same time as that was going on, that they were walking in high levels and absolute beautiful character and great fruit in their lives and the relationships that they had. But I saw that thing and the disillusionment, because I'd gotten so fascinated with supernatural activity because I'd seen it and I'd been impacted by it and I saw the potential of it. But I stopped looking. I stopped spending the time to discern the source of the supernatural activity and just looked at whether or not it was supernatural. And that lack of discernment broke me. And it released this season of disappointment and disillusionment that is one of the greatest gifts that I've ever been given. Because I came out of that season with a higher passion for God and an adamant hold on looking for the real in the midst of all the fluff, and that allure, that mere supernatural activity that doesn't carry the fragrance of Christ it's gone. It's gone. I had no desire for the evil, but I lost. In that season, I had lost the discernment between good and God. And I got that back. And that was probably the third most important season. So far, those would be the three pieces that I'd look at.